The resume lay open on the glass conference table like a quiet accusation, its white space louder than any list of achievements. And in that moment, Matthew felt something inside him crack that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with faith in people. The city outside the Chicago high-rise windows looked indifferent, gray and tall, as if it had seen this kind of hesitation 1,000 times before. Yet his chest tightened as he stared at the screen and wondered how many lives were hidden behind empty profiles and missed chances. What if this were you, sitting on the other side of the table with nothing left to prove except the will to keep going, hoping someone might look past the silence of your past and choose you anyway? What choice would you make if you held the power to decide someone's future with a single signature? Matthew had built his consulting firm from nothing after the recession, sleeping on borrowed couches, losing his first marriage to ambition, and learning the hard way that success often demanded more than it returned. By the time he reached his mid-40s, his name carried weight in boardrooms across the Midwest, but it also carried a fatigue that no promotion could erase. He had seen polished resumes crumble under pressure and flawless interviews dissolve into quiet incompetence. Experience had taught him to read between lines, yet this application offered no lines at all, only a name, Sarah Whitman, and a few basic details that felt almost apologetic. The hiring committee had already dismissed it, and logically, he should have done the same, but something about the emptiness felt familiar, like the long months after his father's death when grief had erased his own sense of worth. Sarah sat alone in the waiting room, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles ached, trying to steady a life that had spun out of control years earlier. She had once been a top student in Ohio, full of plans and color-coded notebooks, until her mother's illness drained their savings and pulled her back home. Caregiving turned into a full-time existence, then into grief, then into a stretch of years that no resume template could explain without sounding like an excuse. When the last hospital bill was paid and the house sold, Sarah found herself in her early 30s with gaps that recruiters saw as red flags and strangers saw as failure. She had almost deleted the application before submitting it, ashamed of the blank profile, yet desperate enough to hope that honesty might count for something in a world obsessed with polish. The interview itself passed like a quiet storm, polite and restrained, with questions that skirted around what was missing rather than what was present. Matthew noticed the way Sarah listened more than she spoke, the way her eyes softened when discussing teamwork, the way her voice carried the weight of someone who had learned patience through loss. There was no dramatic confession, no rehearsed triumph, just a steady presence that suggested resilience forged in private. As she left the room, Matthew felt an ache he could not name, a reminder of the younger man he once was, sitting across from executives who saw his rough edges and chose safer candidates instead. He wondered how many potential futures were lost each day to fear disguised as professionalism. Days passed as spreadsheets filled his desk, and the committee pressed for a final decision. The safer option was clear, a candidate with credentials that gleamed and references that sang. Yet each time Matthew opened that polished file, he felt nothing, only the dull assurance of predictability. When he returned to Sarah's blank profile, he felt something else, a quiet pull toward the unknown that echoed the risks he had taken when he first believed in himself without proof. Late one evening, alone in the office, he thought about grace, about the moments when someone had extended it to him without guarantees, and how those moments had changed the trajectory of his life. The choice before him was no longer about filling a position, it was about deciding what kind of leader and person he wanted to be. Sarah received the call on a rainy afternoon in a small apartment she had just managed to afford, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the smell of old cardboard. She listened, stunned, as the words settled into her bones, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to cry without apology. The job did not erase her past or magically restore what she had lost, but it gave her something she had been missing far longer than money, the sense that she was seen. Walking into the office on her first day, She carried the weight of fear and gratitude in equal measure, determined not to waste the chance she had been given. Matthew watched her integrate slowly, make mistakes, learn, and grow, and with each small success, he felt a quiet confirmation that risk, when rooted in compassion, could be transformative. The months that followed were not easy for either of them. Sarah struggled with imposter syndrome and the unspoken pressure to prove that the blank profile had not been a mistake. Matthew faced skepticism from partners who questioned his judgment and warned him about setting precedents. Yet in the tension, something unexpected emerged, a culture of patience and mentorship that began to ripple through the firm. Others felt safer admitting gaps, asking for help, and choosing growth over pretense. Matthew realized that leadership was not about flawless decisions, but about courageous ones, and Sarah learned that her years of hardship had given her a depth no certificate could replace. On a quiet evening nearly a year later, as the office lights dimmed and the city hummed below, Matthew reflected on how a single choice had softened the edges of his own heart. He thought about the countless moments when people are reduced to summaries and judged by what they cannot show, and how easy it is to overlook the strength hidden in silence. Sarah, packing up her desk nearby, carried herself differently now, not because her past had changed, but because her future finally felt possible. Their paths had intersected not through perfection, but through a willingness to see beyond it, and in that seeing, both had been altered. Before the story ends, take a moment and tell us in the comments if you have ever been given, or given someone else, a chance that changed everything. If this story truly touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and carry its message with you as a reminder of the quiet power of choosing someone anyway.